Hey there,
You know, I,
everybody. Welcome back. We're just hanging out here for a minute or so before we get started. Welcome, folks. Good to see some people who've come to your first webinar. Welcome. It's exciting to have you here. For those who are who are returning, which is actually a lot of folks, it's good to see you back. So we'll probably get started in a few minutes, but if this is your first time, type in the chat box where you're coming in from. Natalie, where are you right now in Kenya?
I'm at home in my apartment in Nairobi, Kenya, in my what I call my fifth floor farm. I've got chickens on my balconies and a lot of plants and food growing.
nice.
Nice. You're living full time in Kenya? Is that?
Yeah. I've been in this apartment for 9 years, and I've been living in the region of East Africa for 13 years.
Nice.
I actually came. I came in 2005 to. My background is urban and regional planning with a focus on economic development, and I came to work in South Sudan in 2005 on post-war town planning and reconstruction. And I lived in South Sudan for 4 years before moving to Nairobi, and I've been here and I've been based here, but working throughout the whole region and also in Southeast Asia in that time.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever collab with Warren Brush? Sometimes he does.
Yeah.
He rolls
through.
So,
yeah, I'll talk about Warren because he was part of the project that we're doing now. I've studied with Warren in California. I did a dryland harvesting course with him in Arizona and also one in Laikipia here in Kenya. And he came, I brought him out as a consultant to help us on this project. And then we've got some plans to roll out some other design projects as well.
Nice.
All
right.
As an aside, I love that we can tell that where Natalie is. It's nighttime, and it's like really bright. Like you and I both have ample sunlight where we are, and Natalie's kind of shaded because it's darker.
Yeah. Where are you, Neil?
I'm currently in Salt Lake City.
Oh, I thought you were.
My family's been here for the last year and a half, and I've been commuting to Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Commuting, yeah, that's a good word for it.
I know it's pretty strange. Anyhow, I think we should keep going.
Yeah, let's take it off. So, welcome everybody back to Sustainable Design Masterclass. Yeah, we're dedicated to bringing you some of the top regenerative system designers in the known world. These are people who are doing large-scale ecosystem restoration and now taking care of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of displaced people, refugees. A lot of what we're focused on is entrepreneurship, agroecology, agroforestry, things that we can use to repair Earth systems while we make a living, while we care for the people around us. So we try to intertwine the different aspects from all these systems and give you different pathways for seeing how you can fit these into your life, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a grad student who wants to fit this into their livelihood, whether you want to make a transition. And just if you're interested in the topic, we like to introduce you to all these different kinds of pathways. So this is your first time. Make sure you turn off distractions. Turn them off. Throw your phone in the trash can. Or, well, don't throw it into the trash. Just kind of leave it off in a safe space. Turn off your Facebook, all these other background programs, and you want to turn off those background programs because it'll save you bandwidth. But most of all, you want to be focused on Natalie because she's coming all the way from Kenya to answer your questions. We're here to answer your questions, and hold your questions to the very end. She's going to blow your mind with this awesome, amazing, incredible presentation. And with that, I'll let Neil give an intro for Natalie, and then we'll get going.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sustainable Design Masterclass. Natalie's got a really complex set of things she deals with at her work, but her official title is Regional Resilience and Livelihoods Coordinator for East Africa and Yemen. She's with the Danish Refugee Council there. She does systems-based approaches, working primarily with displaced communities, whether that means internally displaced or refugees. She's going to tell us more about what that means. But she's got teams working all over East Africa and she oversees or advises on projects in Yemen, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, the Congo, and Burundi. So she's involved in a lot of different climates with a lot of different communities, and I'm really fascinated by how much she has to interact with different cultures and different peoples, and in addition to that, how she approaches people and then how she approaches environment is something I've been really interested in learning from her. And with that, Natalie, I'm going to let you go into much more depth on that. Folks, please hold your questions till the end. We'll do a Q&A after she's done. But Natalie, we're really excited to have you, and thank you to everybody who's showing up live. Just to preempt the question, as with all our other webinars, this is being recorded, and then it will be free to view once we get the replay out for at least 72 hours before it goes back behind the paywall. So welcome, Natalie, and thanks to all of you for attending.
Thank you. Great. Well, this is the first webinar I've done, so it's exciting, and I'm glad to have this chance. A bit about me. I've been living here in East Africa for 13 years. I have been based in Nairobi for 9 years and working throughout the continent. I came to work in South Sudan in 2005 on post-war town planning and reconstruction. My background is urban and regional planning. Then I became country director for my organization there. Then I moved to Nairobi, and I'm now with the Danish Refugee Council based in Nairobi, and I am the senior technical advisor to our teams in 10 countries that are working with displaced communities and host communities. So I'm going to give a little bit of I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation, but the sequence is basically that I'll just give a very brief overview to kind of clarify, what are refugees, what is mixed migration, what are these flows, and what are the sort of different types of sectors that we deal in, and things like that. So should I just go ahead and launch into this now?
Yeah, go for it. Open it up and we'll get started.
Okay. So all right. Let me know if this is full screen.
Yeah, and everybody let me know if you can hear and see Natalie fine. So give me some ones in the chat box if everything looks good. It looks good on my end.
Looks good on my end too.
Okay.
Monique's saying one, cool. Yeah, it looks like we're all good to go.
Okay, and you can't see my little GoToWebinar box, right? Okay.
You're
all right,
set.
so yeah, so I work for the Danish Refugee Council, which operates in over 30 countries. It started in 1956 in response to post-World War II migration. So, what is this? There's a lot of talk in the world right now about refugees, as we know, in the political realm. And in terms of mixed migration, I just want to clarify that people move around the world all the time for a lot of different reasons. My own story, my biological father was a refugee. His family were asylum seekers from Ukraine. He grew up in Brazil. The person who raised me as a father was also an asylum seeker who left Poland and finally came to the US after being registered with UNHCR in Germany. My mother and her family are migrants from Poland, and I myself am a migrant. I've been living in East Africa for 13 years. So there are a lot of different reasons why people move around, and people are moving around all the time, all over the place. So when we talk about mixed migration, people, they're moving because of where they're coming from. Livelihoods are undermined or threatened. They are looking for economic betterment or education. There's socioeconomic upheaval where they're coming from. They may be victims of forced displacement as a result of violent conflict, or it could be a mix of all of these things. And when we talk about mixed migratory flows, we're talking about refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants who are using the same streams and corridors and same agents, same facilities, and crossing paths. And so it's just a swarm. And in this graphic here, although this was from 2017, it's really like people are playing musical chairs. I mean, we've got people from Somalia going into Yemen, from Yemen coming into Somalia. So you've got one group escaping drought-induced famine, and they're rushing into a war zone where, they may get sucked into a human trafficking situation, and then vice versa. You may have people from Yemen who are rushing into Djibouti, and so it's you've got this just constant swapping of places. And so, it causes a lot of strain on communities and on the host communities that where they land, because in most of these places where people are migrating to try to seek refuge, those are not places that are necessarily well developed, that have a lot of resources and basic services. So that creates an additional strain and potential for conflict. And the Danish Refugee Council, by the way, operates mostly in conflict areas. So when we are talking about the kind of work that we do, we operate in three main pillars. The first is emergency. When an emergency happens, when there's an outbreak, for whatever reason that might be, we provide humanitarian relief, and it falls in the baskets of food, shelter, water, and protection. When a community is now, our displaced population has now gone over that emergency moment, now we're looking at what we call durable solutions. And that is, we've got one of three choices. Either they voluntarily repatriate, they return to their place of origin, or they resettle in another country, maybe a country that has open arms to refugees and migrants. And then the last is just integration into the community that has been the landing pad. So that's what we've referred to as durable solutions. And that's really like a recovery mode. That's when we can start looking at livelihoods activities, economic activities, and not only with the displaced population, but the community that is hosting them, especially to alleviate tensions between the two and to avoid conflict. When we talk about root causes, we're looking at, what are the driving forces that have caused displacement? And historically for DRC, Danish Refugee Council, we're looking at places that have been plagued by conflict of different types. So that can be anything from, in this region, cattle raiding and banditry and inter-community, inter-tribal, inter-clan fighting, or it can be the Saudi coalition and the whole Yemeni situation where it's a full-out war. Increasingly, though, there's a lot of, bleeding into disaster and conflict with ecological degradation, and ecological degradation can be a driver for displacement, especially when we have drought-induced famine, and that drought is not, I really want us to change the narrative in my organization and in my industry about, and globally. We need to, yes, climate change is happening, but ecological degradation is why we have the drought flood cycles in a place where we have overgrazing, mismanagement of land, deforestation for domestic fuels and building fibers. So we really have to make that distinction. And the good news is that with ecological degradation, there are more immediate things we can do to address those and reverse those. Now, I hear people who are not part of the international industry at all use a lot of terms interchangeably, and I just want to clarify: international aid and development, recovery, emergency, and humanitarian relief are not interchangeable. I hear people saying, I want to go into humanitarian development. I don't know what that is. Humanitarian work is emergency and relief. Development is long-term development or programming for, a longer-term result. So just to give you a glimpse, excuse me, into some of the context where we're working. You'll have to excuse me because I'm under the weather and I'm actually having an asthma issue this week. But again, in the mixed migration basket, we have different types of displaced populations. We have refugees, which are people who leave their country. We have internally displaced people. That means that, if you're in northern Somalia and there's drought or conflict, you may move to another part of Somalia to seek humanitarian relief and protection and things like that. So this here is in South Sudan, in a town called Malakal, and it's in the northernmost point of South Sudan. And this is a protection of civilians camp. So this is a really dire situation. It's incredibly hot, and it's very cramped, and it was meant to be extremely temporary. Not that all, sort of refugee camps and settlements aren't meant to be temporary, but this was literally within the UN mission in South Sudan, had a big camp there, compound, and at one point there was an outbreak of conflict, and overnight people poured in here. And so they're not allowed to use permanent building materials. They're not really even allowed to plant trees. And I say that because a lot of people in the permaculture world get very excited. They get their permaculture design course and they want to rush out to a refugee camp and just start mulching and composting, and and that's not acceptable, to come into a context when you don't understand the conflict context, the conflict sensitivity. In a place like a camp, you may have people who just escaped from South Sudan coming into Uganda, and they're from warring tribes, and now they're situated in the same place. So you've got to be very, cognizant that there are a lot of invisible dynamics to be aware of. So if you're looking at, working in a refugee context, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut, and learn what the context is, and really try to understand who you're working for, who you're working with and through, who are the stakeholders. So this is one example of a type of camp, but this is called a POC, or a protection of civilians camp. Then we also have other styles of camps that look like towns, like in Kakuma refugee camp. In Uganda, refugees get plots of land, like they can get 100 by 100 meters or 30 by 30 meters, so that at least they can do some food production. And Uganda is very, very amenable to displaced populations. And so, from a regulatory standpoint, they're really accepting and being welcoming and providing legal status so that people can settle there properly, because the conflict in South Sudan has been going on for 60 years, 65 almost now. And so, when we, as somebody who studied permaculture and with a background in urban planning and design, when I'm walking through, this is just my little notebook from when I'm walking through the camp, I'm asking the engineers, which is the direction of the prevailing winds, and why have we not oriented the grid pattern along those prevailing winds? Because the temperatures there are so high that it's really oppressive. People kill themselves regularly, people die regularly. So it's, anything that we can do to bring down even 1 or 2 degrees temperature. So even if we can't realign the grid pattern, then how can we punch our holes, the windows in the individual shelters, so that we're able to harvest that ventilation and at least bring down the temperatures? So when we're looking at placemaking and design in a camp situation, I'm looking at also, how do we integrate food and ecology? How do we bring in agroforestry systems so that people can replenish their building timbers and fibers? How do we manage water? How do we not just try to move it away, but how do we put it into production? And also looking at the social cohesion aspects, because when you're talking about, one thing that I want to clarify is, when we talk about resilience, and I don't care if you are a CEO of a company or if you're a refugee, social capital is the biggest factor in resilience. And so how do we create places in the landscape for social cohesion to play out, so that when people are dealing with psychosocial trauma and healing, they can reach out and connect and have that human connection, so that they can move on to other aspirational elements of livelihoods and things like that. But that space needs to be planned for and designed. And I would do it in an energy efficient way that, emulates when we, what we talk about in sectors and permaculture. So another thing is, we've got so much energy in this camp. We've got, 30, 40,000 people who are excreting nutrient all day, every day. And we spend time, money, energy, and resources to remove that waste, to put it to that place called away. And then we bring in Chinese, generators and fuel and fossil fuels and all of this. And first of all, with my organization, part of my resilience strategy that I'm working on right now for our whole region is I'm making a very hard stance on, we have to divorce ourselves from fossil fuels. I mean, it's just, we don't have time to not do this anymore. We have to stop messing around. So that's one thing. And then another thing is water. We spend time, money, energy, and resources to bring in engineers to figure out how to drain water away, which is a serious issue, because in a crowded, cramped place with very poor hygiene, you have a massive risk of disease vectors. And so to control that, obviously you don't want to have large bodies of standing water. As a permaculturalist, that's an opportunity for me. And as an urban planner, how do we capture and this is a whole nother level of conversation about hydroliteracy that I'm trying to bring into my organization. We need to understand water better. Right now, NGOs all over pump the tertiary source of water, which is groundwater, which is saline, which is destabilizing the hydrological cycle, and we're not even literate about what is the behavior of water and how can we reverse or at least not contribute to drought cycles. So I say that because in all of our contexts, we are usually dependent on tertiary water sources, that's groundwater, rather than primary sources, which is water that falls free and nitrogen rich from the sky, or the secondary water, which is surface water retention. So in this camp, for example, we pump, water is pumped from the Nile River, trucked with a billowing smoke truck to a place where now we use chemicals to process that, and then that becomes the water provision for the POC. That is nonsensical. So we've got to just start making sense, and instead of using time, money, energy, and resources to bring in that water, first catch that which falls free from the sky, and then other things should be a second choice. So I'm going to just show you a couple images here of some different projects in the region, and then I'm going to talk about one particular program that I've started, that I designed and had an internal grant from my organization to implement. So here, this actually, Neil, this is towards the Saudi side. This is in northern Yemen in Sada. And one of the programs that we're doing is using cash for work. So you have a historical, cultural, traditional practice of terracing the mountains for crop production. One major issue right now in Yemen is the production of cats, and that is a major cash crop, and it actually displaces food crops. So arable land is being used for this, which is a big issue because it's estimated now that 10 million people will suffer from famine in Yemen this year. My fantasy is to work with cat growers and convince them that we can increase their yields by integrating agroforestry systems and building their soil and diversifying, and that could actually help the quality of their crops. But that's a line we're not crossing right now. But I think if you're in land restoration, you see how that could be a potential. So here, this is an opportunity that we have in working with a lot of the refugee and emergency context, because we have a modality, a mechanism called cash for work, which is what it sounds like. I mean, I think we all do cash for work. I do cash for work. But here we have women who are supporting the stonework for the rehabilitation of the terraces. And the reason I mention this is because this modality of using cash for work is something that I'm writing into our strategy to be used more and more for doing earthworks and what I call infrastructure for resilience. So that can be earthworks, swales, subsurface water storage, using traditional methods that keeps water cool, dark, and not in a big, open evaporation demonstration site. So here's just another really impressive image of the work that our teams have done with displaced communities in Yemen who are receiving cash for work. And this is work that they're doing by hand. It's backbreaking work. It does establish the foundation for passive water harvesting. Now, when I come in now and I work with our teams, my question is, how can this be improved? And for me, the quick thing that comes to mind is that we have to stabilize the system and build soil structure. And we could do that by alternating, every however many terraces to put in agroforestry systems to build soil fertility and just strengthen and fortify all of this work that's done. So that's another example. And then here, this is in northwestern Kenya in Turkana. Turkana is it's referred to as a semi-arid zone, but increasingly the drought flood cycle is becoming exacerbated. We're experiencing much more, climate shocks and stresses and extremes of weather and the effects. So what we've started to do here with the team is put in a lot of the, what we would kind of typical permaculture methods in agroecology, building soil, composting, using biomass and mulch. We don't use plastic at all ever. We want, I tell the teams that the soil is a stomach and we have to feed that stomach and it's hungry for organic matter. And And so here we've got cover crops, we've got all kinds of different crops growing together. We've got some banana circles, we've got simsim, that's sesame, beans growing all together. So we're creating that verticality and dimensionality to block what I call the three thieves of water. The three thieves of water are sun, wind, and gravity. And so anything that we do has to mitigate for those thieves. In this particular area, this gentleman, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but this gentleman was so excited. He opened up the soil right here and he showed me the soil. It's so rich and black. This is sandy saline soil in a dry area. And this soil now that he's reaching into is rich and black, and it smells like rainforest, and it has earthworms in it. And he said, we don't even irrigate here anymore. It just stays wet. And that for me was very exciting. So what is resilience? It's a big buzzword right now in every sector. There's an organization that's called the International Fertilizer or something, and they're looking for a resilience coordinator right now. And I'm just, everybody is talking about resilience, and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. But from my perspective, you have to ask, who are we talking about? Resilience of whom or what, to what, and through what. So are we talking about women and girls, who, by the way, women and girls globally are the most vulnerable to all types of shocks and stresses: political, social, economic, climate, ecological degradation, all of it. Women and girls just really get the bad end of the deal for a lot of reasons: access to and control over resources and many things. I could sketch out for you a whole link on the connection between sexual and gender-based violence and ecological degradation, but that'll be the next webinar. So is it about individuals? Is it households? Is it entire communities? Is it institutions? So for example, if a shock or stress happens, if a drought happens or a flood happens, what is the propensity of government institutions, formal or informal, to respond and to be able to make quick decisions, to address issues? Are we talking about resilience of infrastructure? If there's a road, a Marham road that goes from one village to another, or to a major town to another major town, and that is threatened to be washed out because there's so much soil erosion and roads and bridges wash out, that's your market infrastructure, and those are economic corridors where trade of goods happens, and so that also is vulnerable. So how do we build resilience of that? And then markets are self-organizing systems. They're kind of like a murmuration of starlings, but when a shock or stress happens and the market freaks out like a swarm of bees, how do they now reorganize themselves and thrive so that they're meeting the needs of the local population? And so for my organization, when we're doing market systems development, what are those hinge points, and how do we unlock the economic intestines, so to speak, so that we can get things flowing, so that we're trying to link market actors so that services can be provided, or make introductions, or there's a lot of different ways to do that. But the question is, first identify who or what is the vulnerable thing, and how and through what do you want to build resilience. So with women and girls, households, communities, institutions, infrastructure, markets, all of those have different ways that we can approach our programming to support those systems to help build resilience. And the resilience capacities that we talk about are absorptive, adaptive, and transformative. So for example, if a tornado hits my house right now, knock on wood, I have my mobile phone, I have an ATM card, I have people I can call. That is the absorptive capacity, which helps to alleviate a bit of that impact on me. And I have means and resources that I can reach out to help me get through this and get to the next step. Adaptive may be, well, maybe I shouldn't live in a 5th floor apartment if this is a tornado prone area. So I'm going to adapt my strategy to do something a bit different, so that in the future, if I anticipate shocks and stresses, I won't receive such a hard hit. And then transformative would be, if the government says, what, this whole area is prone to tornadoes, and we're just not going to allow construction to happen here. So that's a systems level, not something maybe that the household has control over, but a larger systems level market, private sector, government, regulatory, enabling environment, decision making, so that transformative change to build resilience of these other things that I listed can take place. So I'm working on a regional resilience strategy right now. And the 4 main buckets that I want to look at include, let me see if I can, I just want to move this window so I can, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're
Sound
coming in fine.
Okay, shoot. Okay, so the 4 main areas that I want our teams to think about, you know, in a lot of NGOs, we really focus on resilience as an economic activity, meaning that resilience equals money. Now, if my house is on fire at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to run out and apply for a job at McDonald's or run to try to get a loan. Yeah, I'm going to scream, help, help me, help. I need connection. I need social capital to get me through this. So, you know, it's really, we need to open up and have much more of a 3-dimensional view in terms of what do we mean by resilience. And for me, I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible, and these are highly integrated. But for example, within the natural environment, we want to rebuild the survival and resource base. As I mentioned, in East Africa and Yemen, people historically, their traditional livelihood strategies fell either into a spectrum of pastoralism and livestock holding, agropastoralism, or agriculture. And all of those rely on natural resources. And as we know, I don't care what industry you're involved in, there's no economy without ecology. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's a technical impossibility. So how can we revive and revitalize that survival resource base for communities? We can do this with land restoration, water harvesting, agroecology, agroforestry, farmer managed natural resource management, ethnobotany. So really zooming into a space, and when you come into a community, understand who lives there, what are their resources, what has been their relationship with this land or this place for a long time. And of course, soil. I should have put soil there. Soil is a given. The built environment, looking at hardscape water harvesting. And when I say hardscape, I mean every rooftop, every road. A road is just a long roof, and it collects water and it moves water. So how do we manage every drop of water and have a plan for every single water drop that falls and move it into production? When I say that, I mean, like, I drive through East Africa and we have these long Maram roads. Those are like a lateritic, dirt road, and it's crested, and then the drainage falls to either side, and then sometimes they'll have these little, ditches that just try to move the water away. I don't know why that's not carried through. So, let's carry those through so that either it goes into just saturate and the soil and the landscape, or into a food production system, or into a water catchment for irrigation and water storage. So hardscape of water harvesting, renewable energy. Definitely we have to diverse ourselves from fossil fuels, but there's a lot of people who come in with innovation, and there's so much focus on solar. We cover Congo, and we provide response to rape victims of blood minerals for photovoltaics. So as great as solar is, the way that it's made right now is still in a degenerative way versus regenerative. And so can we look at other things like wind, like biogas? And how do we prioritize those? I'm not anti-solar, it's still not quite where it needs to be for me, given the irony of the sort of the cycle that we're working in. So renewable energy, waste management. When you have a mass collection of people, we've got a lot of waste and a lot of opportunity to use that waste and put that either back into soil or back into some other use, rather than it just going into a disease vector. CIPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. So in a lot of our areas, we have a major sexual and gender-based violence in camps and settlements. And so how do we create more transparency in the landscape, diffused lighting, use biogas for lighting of camps, and design for well-being, as I was mentioning before, integrated with food and biodiversity. And I mean, I have a motto that says, everybody grow food everywhere. All the people, all the food. So up the walls, over the top, canopies. I would love to see, every refugee camp and settlement just covered in a canopy of passion fruits and binding beans and cucumbers and things. So Then again, energy efficient design and designing for designing for those wild energies, sun, wind, and slope. So that has to go into the planning and design. Looking at the social environment, how do we increase social cohesion, social accountability? We see that, all around the world right now, social issues and current affairs are really being tested. And so how do we create places in the landscape and in our programming to improve social cohesion, good governance? We also work, my organization, we have an arm called the Danish Demining Group, and they work especially in armed violence reduction, peace building, conflict mitigation, mine action. So that plus gender transformation. I don't say gender equity or gender equality or gender empowerment. I'm talking about transforming the systems that provide favorable conditions for one sex over another. And that's a systemic thing. So that has to be addressed. And then institutional strengthening. So how do we support government, in order to help them build resilience for communities and constituents? I'll give you an example. We're going to start doing some small land restoration and permaculture gardens in schools in the largest and poorest region of Uganda, and I'm roping in the local government because we want them to be seen as being accountable, but we also want them to learn and see how we're doing this, so that when we can hopefully walk through the budgeting, their annual fiscal calendar and budgeting and planning cycles, that we can have shared learning dialogues about what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, and how can that help them to plan. And then lastly, the economic environment. And here, I'm very focused on looking at how do we create regenerative culture, how do we focus on a bioregional economy, using market facilitation, but looking at industrial symbiosis. How do the byproducts and waste streams of one industrial or economic enterprise become a raw input or material for another, and we create a circular economy? And it's all about symbiosis, and it has to start with green chemistry, which we don't necessarily have capacity for in our camps, but it's really looking at from the green chemistry from plastics and everything. How do we start all over? How does nature do it? How does nature find the design solutions that we need? So I'm going to talk now really quickly about this project that I'm doing in Turkana, which is in the northwestern part of Kenya. And it's home to a very large refugee camp that's been there for generations, and it hosts refugees from 16 different countries around the world, around the region, and further, even beyond the region. And so my organization, knowing that I'm passionate about these things, encouraged me to apply for own funds, which is an internal grant. And I got about just less than 50,000 USD to work with a village on addressing some of their issues. So the village is called Mananaroi, and it is a host community. So it's not a refugee community, but it is it's a village of the Turkana tribe, who are historically pastoralists, who are plagued by all the issues that people face in this region, the drought flood cycle, increasing food insecurity, water insecurity, energy insecurity, livelihoods, lack of income. So the challenges, as I just mentioned, flooding of, they have food insecurity, water insecurity, flooding of homes and flooding of the community. They have massive soil erosive patterns throughout the whole landscape, major ecological degradation. Native trees are being outcompeted by invasive prosopis, which I believe also is in Saudi and Yemen and Middle East. And then they did have one borehole which had broken because a tree fell on it, and then also the borehole had dried up. So it's a small village. It's about 50 households, but there's roughly 4 to 6 people in each household. And so we wanted to demonstrate, just start a small little pilot to demonstrate what we're going to do there, and it's still ongoing. So I'm going to share some photos with you. But these are some of the girls. Water is the girls' and women's domain. And so this is really, this area, this landscape that you're seeing is a lager, or an old dried up riverbed. And so it floods during the rainy season, and that sand allows the water to infiltrate through, and then they dig these shallow wells, and they use that for livestock watering and for human potable, well, not potable, but human water. And what we did was in April, we had a workshop, and this was the first phase of the project, which ends in November. And I brought staff, and I mean water and sanitation staff, livelihoods, monitoring and evaluation. I'm trying to smash our sectors together so that our teams understand there's no siloed thinking. We can't do that anymore. That's not solution-based, and it's just not the way we want to do it. We have to be working together. So I brought WASH, livelihoods, monitoring and evaluation staff. I brought government partners from the National Drought and Management Agency, the Office of Disaster Preparedness, Ministry of Agriculture, the ward administrator, the chief, the assistant chief. There's actually one missing here. It's the land reclamation officer. Then I want this knowledge to go big. So I've partnered with my former partners from the University of Nairobi to develop a case study on this so that they can also go and tell the story to their student body and faculty about what we're doing in a dryland context. We've got Film Aid and some former refugees who are who've been trained by Film Aid, which is an NGO that does documentary filmmaking. So they have captured everything in a documentary film, which has not yet been released. And then Locado, which is a small community-based organization that does tree nurseries and agroforestry. And then we also had invited some partner engineers from our partner organization, the Norwegian Refugee Council. And then we had community members, about 50 members from the community that were registered, 25 women and 25 men. So the activities that we had planned and what we did in this phase 1 was to establish deep soil amendment, double dug sunken gardens using only local materials. And I stress that because so many of our programs come with inputs, and that usually means chemicals and fake seeds. And I say fake seeds because they are not renewable or they lose vitality over time. And so it's very important that we focus on locally improved, locally adapted seeds. And that they continue to retain their vitality over long periods of time. So a lot of money goes into inputs, including tools and services and things that people cannot continue to purchase after an NGO leaves. And so the focus was really on just what can we do with what is here. So we did a whole resource mapping using bone, biochar, leaves, manure from the local community. We used a bio-intensive planting method to control weeds and maximize food grown in very small spaces. We repaired their borehole. We repaired the pump and the masonry because it includes some animal watering troughs. We engaged in borehole recharge swales in the active recharge zone with spillways into the dry riverbed. And we made a footbridge from the community trail directly to the borehole. We did large watershed swales to alleviate community flooding. And we're doing some biodiversity regeneration with indigenous tree and grass planting. Then also with indigenous tree and grass seeding, doing drought resistant tree planting with water harvesting structures and boomerang swales. And then training and pruning of local tree species, including prosopis. Prosopis is a very, invasive, prolific tree that grows there, but it's a primary building timber and primary domestic fuel for charcoal. But they have to go, because goats eat the little baby trees, they keep just spreading out into kind of these sprawling bushes instead of going straight up and strong with big girth, so that they are more marketable and fetch a higher price in the market because they're straight and better for building or have better quality charcoal. And charcoal is in this region where it's used as a mechanism to control and manage this invasive species is not an unsustainable thing. This tree is an absolute weed. So this is the FMNR, Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration Method. And then I think Raleigh or Neil, you were asking about Warren Brush. So we were with Warren Brush to do this training. It was a modified resilience design training that we did. And so let me just talk about what our process was. What we started, we did 2 days of presentation with our teams that came in from the region and local government, and we talked about some permaculture, we talked about dryland water harvesting, a lot of different principles of resilience design processes and planning. And then we did resource mapping just around our compound, which was in Kakuma town, my organization's compound. And we looked at all the different types of resources that are available there, which were surprising to the team to realize there's so much there that they didn't realize. We talked about planting the rain. There's Warren there. You know, water harvesting for dryland resilience and recharging spring lines and boreholes. So this was sort of the whole 2 days of theory. Then we broke into groups. We were discussing how can we now return and apply some of this knowledge into our context in the different countries. And then here, that's my baby, my new laser level. So we learned how to use, you know, what I wanted to demonstrate in this project is going back to the cash for work example I gave from Yemen. We have cash for work modalities that people can use to bring in labor and provide income while people are doing earthworks. But at the same time, we work with UN and big agencies and sometimes have large earth moving equipment to clear areas for camps. So how can we also use large machinery to you know, expedite you know, restructuring of the landscape to harvest water? So then we went out to the community and, you know, we asked them about, to kind of tell the story and the time of their grandfathers. And what they said was that in the time of their grandfathers, the trees used to be very tall. There were trees everywhere and they were very, very tall. It was a big canopy that covered and shaded the place, provided biomass and organic nutrient. And at that time, animals were healthier, people were healthier, there was food, and there was clean water. And one thing to keep in mind is that historically, water would always run down from up to down to the village. It ran clean and it came to them. Now what happens is that communities in degraded and collapsed landscapes have to travel down to get the water, and it's now dirty and it's filled with disease. So that's because of a disrupted cycle. So what we asked about, what we're trying to identify is looking at area-based planning and knowledge. What is the ethnobotany of that area? What are the kinds of resources that people have? And then there's the 5 F's that we talk about: food, fodder, fiber, fuel, and fertility. What kind of plants? And you can ask people in the village, is there a certain plant or tree that if something else grows near it, it is especially healthy? And they can tell you immediately. So that fertility is that 5th F. So we're looking at the indigenous knowledge on medicines, on remedies, you know, different remedies for things, crafts, innovation. There was one cactus that one lady pulled up and she said, this thing is great for, you know, skin blemishes or if you have any skin problem, but we also dunk it in blood and throw it to the hyenas to poison them if they're disturbing our livestock. So great multi-purpose plant. Again, looking at area-based planning, what's the culture, the kinds of shelters, the types of income, the interaction with ecology, ethnobotany. So when we talk about ethnobotany, indigenous tree, shrubs, plant, and grass species. So this was the day that we worked with the community to do community resource mapping, and we broke into 4 teams, and the 4 teams went out from the watershed all the way down to the riverbed and collected every kind of resource that they could imagine. Then we all came back together, piled it up, and I think that they were so happy to see the amount of wealth that they have, looking at all the different kinds of resources they have, from food and things that they can get by with in the dry season. So here they were showing all kinds of different things you just can't even imagine and explaining how they're used historically. So it was just very, very lovely. They showed us pests and things that are threats to them. So not only resources, but risks. And then we moved on and we showed them how to make A-frames. I'm gonna, you know, I've got some photos here. I'll just talk through them quickly. But here we're demonstrating how to make an A-frame survey tool, which is just a tool to survey the contours of the land. And so we're really, you know, you'll notice that these are pictures of women because I was very, very keen to make sure that we're building the muscle memory of women to do this and the confidence to be able to do it. And they got it immediately. They were all carpenters. It was a very good experience for them. And then here we are. We had big and small A-frames. And what we did is show them how to use that. And we started to measure out the contours. Neil and Raleigh, you can see me, right?
Yeah, we can see you great.
Okay, so I have a diagram. It's not to scale, but just to give just to give everyone a little idea. So this is our village, and from the top of the watershed down to the riverbed is more than a kilometer. And
real quick, if you want people to see that, let's turn off your presentation. Let me turn off. I'll like stop the presentation real quick, so you'll be just your webcam. So let's do that.
Okay.
All right. So now people can see that picture. Okay.
So basically, I mean, it's a really, really rough diagram here, but we've got a watershed, and all the water from this bowl flattens out into an alluvium that collects and now starts to flood this village, and then and people will be in their houses with up to water up to their knees and thighs. And then, so here's the small village, and then we've got the area where they do crop production. Will it help if I write in it? So they have some crop fields, and then the borehole, which is down on the bottom. And so our interventions were swales around the individual homes, we're using hand-dug swales, and then with the excavator, these large water swales at the top of, towards the bottom of the watershed, and then down, this is a road, and then down by the borehole, we did with the excavator a large recharge swale. So.
Hey, what's up?
Oh, the audio cut out there real quick. Does anyone else?
She's frozen for me too, Raleigh.
Okay, so she's frozen there. All right, yeah, let me know if everybody else, is it frozen? Okay, Monique's saying she's frozen for me too. Daniel, frozen. All right, Natalie got frozen there real quick. My bad. Well, she should pop in back.
Yeah.
If all else fails, she can log out and log back in.
Tell her to log back in.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's so cool. I love seeing that. Oh, when people really have nothing, they still can pull.
Well, yeah, that's probably what he wants.
Pull off these community projects. This is really cool.
Anytime they come into his home, he's probably bringing some like drug dog.
Dale's frozen too. Yeah, we'll get her back.
Yeah, we'll get her.
We'll get her back real quick. So she's paused for the moment. I want to say there's other people doing great work. Who is Tom?
Am I back?
Tom? All right, now we can hear you.
There you are.
Great. Yeah, let's turn on your webcam, and then you should be you're back and good.
My webcam is not on? Oh, here we go.
No, we can't see your webcam.
Hold on, it's.
Yeah.
No. Oop. Yeah, sometimes that happens on Wi-Fi where the signal like cuts out for a second, and then it.
Yep.
There we go.
Okay.
And
we're still speaking from the other side of the globe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so you saw my diagram. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put this PowerPoint back on.
Cool.
Okay. Are we good?
Yeah, I made you the presenter, so just put your PowerPoint back on. You should be all good.
Okay, show my screen, main screen.
Yep.
Oops. Okay, so you can see this screen now, right? The presentation.
Yep, correct.
Why is this not? Okay. There we go. Okay, so here we are in the village area below, where the base of the mountains is, and we're digging a swale around Regina's house. Regina is our woman who's a widow, and she's quite vulnerable. So we're doing a swale behind her home to mitigate flood risk and catch some of that water. And we did one also in front of her home, which is downhill, as a tree planting system to get some shade from that hot afternoon sun. So here are people, starting to measure out the swales, starting to dig them. And then here we are. You can see Warren there, Neil. And then that house on the left is Regina's house. So we're creating swales that mitigate the flood risk, but now we've also started a swale that is going to be transformed into a perma garden. It was so great that with rain, the next day every time we dug a swale, because people immediately understood then what we were trying to do. So you can see the one on the right was the one that we were digging in the previous image. And so this is capturing some of the water from her house, and then behind that green fence, which we also did, is another swale which feeds and quenches her permaculture garden. The swale that's here on the left is the one that's in front of her home, and that is where we planted trees so that she can have some shade and respite from that hot afternoon sun. So here with the community, we were gathering local materials. We had bones we crushed, we had goat manure, we had green leaves. We can presume that this place was recently a forest, and therefore it's not actually that saline, the soil. And so what that means is that we did add a bit of ash without fear of it becoming overly alkaline. But we did a double dig method. So we dig those gardens down about a foot to remove that top foot layer of topsoil, and then that hard pan, which is down below, really crushed that up with a digging bar and added these soil amendments, the bone char, the leaves, the manure, and really mix that into that broken up hard pan. And now what happens is that means that plants can now grow down, the root system can go straight down rather than hitting that hard pan and going out vertically, in which they would compete with one another. And so now, since we've created a system that the roots don't compete with one another, we can plant much more intensively, and the plants can shade out and act as their own cover crop to shade out weeds, but also retain soil moisture. So here, this is the intensive planting, and immediately we had the women and community come in and kind of take over and make sure that they're building their muscle memory on how to do this, so that there can be uptake on that. So here we're planting all kinds of different vegetables that they like and know. This is at another home. Her name is Angelina. So here, basically, we kind of let now our team with the village now start a new garden to see how they are able to apply what they're learning. And then this is a great shot. This is at Regina's garden, and this is, you can see here really clearly the beds were made on contour. So now that water gets captured in the swale and it soaks down inside the soil, which is the largest and cheapest water tank that exists. And so that's going to hydrate long term. And so, water always will go downhill. You just wanted to do it inside the soil, not on top. So that'll trickle down and it'll help create moisture long term. What we found is that when we dug down one shovel, when you look in that hole, the moisture band, even though it had been raining for weeks and weeks and weeks, that moisture band was only not more than 2 inches, which means that despite this heavy rain and this huge volume of water, there's no infiltration. And so now when that rain ceases and the dry season comes, it just takes a week for all that residual moisture to evaporate, and there's nothing left deep down. Below that moisture band, you have just dry sand. So this is what we're trying to address. So we planted seeds, but we were there for 8 days, and before we left, we had germination of amaranth. Now, on the bottom of the system, as I showed you in the diagram, they have a borehole that in 2010, I think it was, or 8, a big tree fell on it and broke the pump, and you can see that there's just the concrete has become dilapidated and the troughs aren't working, and the whole borehole has been spoiled. So what we wanted to do is to create an active recharge system in that recharge area. And so we did swales, but they're actually not swale, they're not on contour. They were at 2% grade, so that those arms of the swale reach out, collect the water, and bring it down into the borehole area now. And this is something that in my regional resilience strategy is a must. I don't want to see any boreholes being dug without an ecological recharge plan. That means not only earthworks where possible, but also the local ecology and agroforestry systems, and also a management plan for any drop of wastewater that rolls off of that, how that can go even into just feeding a tree. But we can't be just punching boreholes anymore with no plan to put more water back into the soil than we're taking out. So this is what that swale looks like. So we had the digger down there, and it's actually a massive digger, and the swale is bigger in person than it looks here. But this is, so the bottom, the base of this the swale is 2% grade. So it, brings that water down to the borehole and then sinks underground so that it can refill. And it's already working. It's, they're using it. It's got clean water coming out of it. And that's just a little footbridge that our team had made for the women to get across. So at the top of the swale, at the top of the system, at the top of the kind of the subcatchment zone, this watershed is where we did the largest swales. And the point here is really to not only alleviate flood risk from the community, but it's about regenerating that biodiversity. So these swales are just giant throats, which are going to drink this water, swallow it, and as it moves through the soil, eventually even down to their crop production areas, we just have a long-term water storage. And this is also we planted out seeds here, and this is where we want the natural biodiversity regenerate. I tell our teams, under every bit of soil, there's a sleeping forest just waiting to be born. They're ancient seed banks. And as we know, where water accumulates, life generates. So as that water trickles in there and starts to wake up and revitalize these seed banks, then we'll rehydrate the landscape and replenish that growth. We did we did 2 large swales, but in the second phase, we're going to go back and do more of these. And then here's just another view of that. And we had the spillways going into natural drainage, riparian corridors on either side. You can kind of see in the distance, those sort of green corridors. So the spillways pour right into those. Actually, one of the swales is capped on one side, but the spillway goes into the drainage. And then we did this fun thing. I didn't think it was going to be this popular, but this was like everyone's favorite part of the whole workshop. We had these seed balls from Cookswell Gecos, and these are seeds that we selected for local indigenous species. We had 3 species of indigenous trees and 3 species of indigenous grasses from that area. So we just gave buckets full to the kids. And you had chiefs, so like, here, hold my cane, and they went with slingshots with little girls and older, some of the elders, and they walked we told them go as far up into the watershed as you can, and they just spent the whole afternoon shooting seed balls into the landscape, into the swales, and so hopefully this is the future seed bank for more biodiversity. And then here we're armoring. We're trying to, so this tribe, they are livestock keepers, and they have shoats, that's sheep and goats, and they have camels. And so we're trying to armor the spillway to camel-proof it. So the spillway goes from the swale and into that drainage area, but where they cross over, we don't want to create a break or a dip in that spillway. We want it to be controlled, and water is very precise, as we know. So we just tried to armor it so that could be a place where herds could walk over without making too much damage, at least for the first couple of seasons. And then what we did is we showed them how to do tree planting in a dryland area. So we used boomerang swales, and we would dig down deep, and in that hole we would put same soil amendments, bone, charcoal, bone, charcoal, leaves, any carbon that we can find, manure, and then put the tree. And we brought a couple hundred trees, different kinds of fruit trees, but we are also going to work with them to establish a nursery of the indigenous species. So why are we bringing in exotic species? These are fruits that they know and enjoy and that have market value as a potential income. Here are images of tree planting. We worked, rain and shine. Actually, I'm still sick because of this, and this was 2 months ago. This is not going away. So here's just more images. This was immediate uptake. I mean, immediate. When we showed them how to do it, they just took the trees and ran to their houses and started duplicating this. On the right side, you see this big green structure. What that is it's a camel proofing for the tree. So we planted the baby tree, but then they used the prosopis branches to make a cage to protect the tree, keep it shaded, and keep it safe from the animals. And we have a team that is there permanently, and they work with the village, and they're monitoring regularly. And the trees are becoming established. The neem are doing really well, and then we'll bring a couple hundred more trees in October when we have our second phase. So I just scratched for them in the sand a pattern of net and pan, or pit and pan, whatever you want to call it, and immediately they got it, and they were so excited. And this one lady, Angelina, just went crazy all around her house and started to do net and pan. And then it rained, and they immediately saw that from one boomerang to the next, to the next, to the next, it was pouring, you know, all the overflow was pouring from one to the next to the next. And so, I mean, that didn't take a lot of explanation. They loved that. And then here's Warren showing the FMNR method of pruning and training the trees so that we get, you know, rapid growth, we get root dieback, so we're getting some carbon back into that soil, and training that tree for upward growth and straightness and greater girth. And, you know, this is something that the men especially really were very, very keen on. They completely understood right away what we're doing and why. So we provided clippers and tools and really basic inputs, but, you know, they're confident that even if they just have their pangas, their machetes, they can do this on their own. And that's it. Asanteni. That means thank you all. So that's the end of the presentation.
Ooh, boy, that was mind-blowing. Thank you so much. I was like, I've never seen that many like approaches integrated in one, like in one system. That's pretty amazing.
In 1 week.
Yeah.
Is brilliant.
Are you using
Sorry?
like Are you using holistic management with this system, or what?
So that, you know, holistic management or holistic rangeland management is definitely something that I want to be bringing in, especially where we are dealing with communities that are plagued with conflict and resource-based conflict. But no, in this village, not at the moment. It's a homogenous community. They go up into the hills and they graze there. And we just don't have space and time right now because this project ends in November. In the second phase, what we're going to do is way more tree planting, way more pruning, large swales, smaller swales, more permagardens. But now we're going to move into the production zone where they do the crop production, and we'll do alley cropping so that we can get that sun and wind break, and especially shea butter. For those who don't know, shea trees, if you plant shea trees with your ancient grains, sorghum and millet, it rapidly boosts, you know, the fertility of the soil and the abundance of the crops. So, you know, and we do want to be, you know, I'm really keen to partner and get very, very involved with eCraft. We're increasingly engaged in conversations. I'm meeting with them with them this week. So eCraft is the World Agroforestry Center, and they have so much knowledge on, you know, all the different kinds of useful trees and shrubs in different regions, but also when you combine those, what the effects are. So, you know, increasingly, this is something that people are paying attention to. I think I mentioned to Neil, I've been invited to be a speaker at this conference in Switzerland in a couple of weeks on land restoration and conflict. So we know why, you know, that ecological degradation and collapse is a massive driver of conflict. It's not the only one, but it is a major contributor. Syria to South Sudan. It's not the only factor in fragile states, but it is a major contributor. And so when we can reverse those cycles, carbon, mineral, and hydrological cycles, you know, we can at least try to regenerate that resource base so that the stress around livelihoods and the competition of resources is at least a bit alleviated.
That's great. I mean, I asked more about holistic management as in, how did you get the social buy-in from the people in the community, from the NGOs to do all these things, like Farm Managed National Generation, to do your swales? How did you get that social buy-in and get them to all agree to this plan?
Well, first of all, you know, this community approached my organization because they knew that we were working in nearby communities, and they said, why do you guys drive by all the time? Why can't you stop here and help us? So that for me was a big one, right? And you always want to jump onto a moving bus. You don't want to pull a bus uphill. Jump onto a moving bus. Where you have momentum, where you have champions, nurture that. And so this was a community that had requested support, but the big thing is that we listened to their story. We didn't come with answers. We came with questions, and we came with ideas on how to return the landscape to what they described. And so, you know, again, it's something that's accessible to them when we're talking. So the NGOs, we're only working with one NGO, that's mine. So I got the funding from my organization to do this program with the village. It was very important for me to rope in the local government because they need to be doing this. You know, this is their role. And they were very excited, by the way, especially the land reclamation officer, the ag officer. They came to me and, you know, they were with us side by side, you know, carrying rocks, digging. And they asked me, why have we not learned this? Why are you the first person that has come to teach us how to do this? This is the only thing that we should be doing. So, you know, first with the community, we had many pre-visits, you know, and it's so important to manage expectations because a lot of NGOs come, they pay people just for showing up. They come with a lot of, you know, giveaways, and that's not my ethic. And so I made it very clear to our team that we need to go have meetings, manage expectations, talk to the people in the community, and make sure that they understand what we are going to do, what we are going to provide, and what we will not do and will not provide. What we did provide were tools, seeds, tree seedlings, and lunch. So every day we had lunch together. And then at the end we had a big feast. We slaughtered a bunch of goats, halal, of course. And then, yeah, so, you know, they are the owners of this. So the buy-in was easy because we listened to what their challenges were, and we tried to demonstrate what they can do within their capacity and resources to address those independently and have ownership and authorship of that story.
Nice. That's great. That's a good way to. I've heard her approaching that. That's super cool to hear that perspective. So now, folks, if you have any questions you want to ask Natalie, now is the time. Type down the question box below. Otherwise, I'm sure, Neil, you got a few questions yourself, I bet.
You mentioned the World Agroforestry Center. Is that the same one Patrick Worms is involved in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to double check. Do those prosopis cages for seedlings work?
I mean, prosopis is abundant, and it's what they use as the fencing. So it worked in that it provided shade, and
Did it keep the goats out, though? Did it keep the animals off of that seedling? That's what I'm curious about.
Yeah. I mean, those women really tie that in there. I mean, it was pretty taut, knitted, you know, fence. And so, I mean, I'm sure they have to monitor to a degree. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few trees that have been lost, but they, you know, and that's the thing, you know, going back to Raleigh's question, like we didn't come in and say, all right, do the fence this way. We're like, what's your method? Do that.
Yeah, you know? No, it's brilliant. I can't help but compare what I've been doing and the biggest obstacle we've got is that the people don't have the legal ownership of their land, and so the incentive for this to be adopted on the household level is non-existent.
Yeah.
Because there's this fear that if people develop their land and make it productive, that someone's going to come and take it away from them. And it's a huge issue there. Do you? Actually, I've got a number of things I'd love to talk with you about. With Yemen, I think we should do it off the webinar because I think there's a lot that we can talk about with respect to Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that where you have banditry happening from nomads, does security have to precede any sort of development work that you do?
So that's a process. And when I'm talking about the social environment, I mean, my organization does a huge amount in terms of peace building, engaging communities in dialogue. So you can't, you know, this is what I was saying about, you know, Permies, God bless us all, you know, coming out of a PDC and you want to just rush into refugee camp and you have no idea who's who, what's what, and what you're about to step in. And so you've really got to have your finger on the pulse of a place and understand. And don't come in assuming that you've got all the answers just because you know how to do compost, you know. So, you know, it's three-dimensional. You know, all those are all parallel tracks that have to happen together. But I do think that using land restoration can be a peace dividend, because again, the strain in many cases, not all, is the degradation of the resource base. And so people are competing over water and over rangeland that's viable rangeland. So not all communities are the same. You have you have different tribes, you have different clans, you have different, you know, many different contexts in the countries that we're working in. And so again, focusing on area-based planning. You are arriving to a place, there's no one size fits all. You have to do your conflict sensitivity assessments. You have to understand what are the drivers of conflict and what the real issues are of people, and find the champions. I mean, find the champions, whether it's in the government, whether it's in the community, whether it's in a family. There's somebody that's going to be like, wait a minute, I know what you're talking about. I want to be a part of that, you know, and focus on that guy or that lady, you know, and I mean, start small. And but also where you're talking about, you know, the enabling environment of people not being able to cultivate their land, or having they have access to but not control over their land. So access and control are very different things. So is there anything that you can do? I mean, I think, you know, an individual is different than an organization in terms of what's possible, but can you engage the local government to try to create that enabling environment so that what you're talking about, you know, the control over land resources so that people can cultivate it, but also tie it to the bigger picture, which is, you know, water systems and ecological regeneration, and what the overall economic benefit is, because, you know, talk money if that's what people want to hear, because for a lot of people, that's what it comes down to. So, you know, yeah.
Awesome. Natalie, real quick, is there a website we could pull up for folks about, you know,
Not really.
what you're doing? Not really,
No,
not yet. Okay.
No. I mean, I have my personal Facebook groups, which are all the Nat and Friends series. So I've got Nat and Friends Permaculture and Resilience Design, and I do post everything that I do. I post there. I post a lot of videos and resources. But I will have a documentary. The documentary is being completed. We're doing a case study, and so when it's prepared and packaged, we'll be able to share out.
Nice. And in case people want to get a hold of you, it's just nattopa at gmail.com.
No, it's Natalie Topa at gmail.com.
Okay.
Natalie Topa at gmail.com, or I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just send your email address out to everybody. So now they're going to hound you and ask you a bunch of questions. They're going to flood your inbox. That's all.
But I will say a couple of resources, which, I mean, I can send, if I want to send a link, I guess I can send it to Raleigh. But so, you know, USAID has established the Resilience Design for Smallholder Farmers toolkit and measurement toolkit. And so that is like, you know, step-by-step manual on how to do resilience design. They also have that Warren Brush was part of, as was Brad Lancaster.
And then Ben Falk was part of that too, yeah.
Say it again.
Ben Falk was on that team as well.
Oh yeah. And then the Perma Garden Manual, if you're, you know, looking at doing especially dry land, small scale, you know, gardens or small farm. The Perma Garden Manual is also a toolkit that was developed through USAID, and Tom Cole was part of that. Actually, was the driving force behind that. And then yeah, so I mean, those are the tools that we're using and adapting. Like my next steps are, now that, you know, within my organization, I'm trying to get street cred, right? I mean, I need to show some results and how this works. But people immediately are sold. They get it. They understand what it means and why we're doing it. But I need to build capacity of my teams, because as we are building this into proposals, we need to have people who know how to implement it. It's great if you win a proposal, now you got to do it. So we're going to have a series of, you know, kind of my adapted resilience design trainings next year. So we'll do one in extreme dry land. So that might be in Djibouti or Somalia. So I'll bring in the Yemen, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Somalia teams, and northeastern Kenya, so that really those really hyper, you know, arid and hyper arid types of conditions, we'll really tailor that training to those contexts. And then a subtropical resilience design training. So, you know, Uganda, Burundi, South Sudan, Congo, people who are used to a wetter climate with more clay-rich soils, we'll tailor that to them. Excuse me. And then what we want to do is look at within a camp or settlement context, how do we do resilience design? So water harvesting, ferrous cement, you know, within a small shelter, vertical gardening, you know, how we reuse gray water resources, things like that, waste management, you know, to alleviate camp operations as well. And then lastly, you know, what I would love to do is a model compound. So in our own operations, you know, for me, every single one of our offices in the field should be a demonstration site on you know, on kind of energy smart, energy resilient, and energy secure NGO operations. So moving away from fossil fuels, how do we have our own systems? How do we harvest our own water? How do we have you know, a food forest and grow food and some biodiversity within our compounds, so that that's a demonstration, and it can be, you know, a kind of a training, and build this into the culture of my organization, so that now when they go out and they're working with communities, it's just a natural, you know, second nature to them to see that food production looks this way. Because here in Africa, we have so much land that everything is expansive, and then you give somebody 3 acres and they're like, this isn't enough land. I'm like, my friend, go to Bangkok, you know, where like things are planted so intensively, you don't even know what you're talking about. So we've really got to kind of change the mental SIM card of people to say, especially when you're a pastoralist and you used to have free range of land, now you're a refugee in a shelter. What, you know, what livelihood strategy can you have at your disposal? And that has to be an intensive, a more bio-intensive model.
Cool. All right, so we got about 2 questions here. Oh wait, never mind, one was already answered. So one question here from Gabriel asking, how do you prioritize your resilience building activities? Do you do assessments like COBRA? Do you do assessments like COBRA?
Yeah, so that's part, you know, part of what I'm looking at right now is, you know, what are the assessments that we need? And it goes back to trying to understand, you know, who are we trying to build resilience for, of what, and through what? And that's going to depend on totally in different contexts. But when I was leading my previous program, which was called Braced, Building Resilience and Adaptation to Climate Extremes and Disasters, we spent 6 months doing assessments in northeastern Kenya on the Somalia border and the Somalia-Kenya border. And we really try to understand, when a shock or stress happens here, what are all the like shooting a billiard, where do all those balls lay and land, and what are, you know, institutions, markets, how are those affected? How are they able to spring back? What challenges do they have in springing back? And so, you know, that's going to be different in every different context. And in terms of like a one-size-fits-all model, you know, I know that Mercy Corps, based on the work that we were doing in my project, I was formerly with Mercy Corps, they used that exercise that we did to develop a strategic resilience assessment. And so, you know, there's a lot of ways to respond to, when you rely on funds from donors, you know, oftentimes it's easy to get into a cycle where you're just responding, whatever the donor wants, how do we adapt and, you know, tailor a proposal to what they're looking for. But going back to the notion of area-based planning, I would much rather, and, you know, I want to start focusing now at the watershed level. So what that means is, let's pick a watershed that we know is of interest in an area to donors, to local government, for whatever reason, because of conflict. And within that watershed, work with the communities and say, okay, donors, we've got a 10-year vision for this watershed. Here's our first phase is 3 years. Donor, 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 come in, help us fund this. And then the second phase can be another set of donors, or, you know, another set of funding from the same donors. And so really, you know, understanding when you have flood, drought, economic crisis, where do those balls land, and how are people affected, and what is their challenge in bouncing back? Yeah. I just had another point that I forgot, but anyway, I hope that answers it. but it has to be tailored to place. It must be tailored to place and highly customized to that context.
Cool. I think that answers it well. Okay. Let me show this real quick. Awesome. Well, unless anyone has any other questions, I guess we could pretty much close this out. But again, this is absolutely fantastic. I mean, just going back a year, I didn't even know about things like farmer managed natural regeneration, you know, FMNR. But it's so cool seeing all these things that are so interlinked working together, and just being able for people to take these tools and run with them, and not needing a huge budget, not needing these massive desalinization plants and these crazy, you know, geoengineering, you know, giant projects.
So I mean, we haven't even spent half of my budget yet. So that's like, you know, $25,000, and that included consultants and trainings, and, you know, and we deal with, my former program was over $7 million, you know, and I don't know what the impact is, but here we definitely will see. You know, the point is to get the landscape into an autopilot mode, so that even when you walk away, it is just, it's starting to regenerate itself, you know, and harvest its own water and seed its own seeds. We are bringing pigeon boxes into the crop production areas. I'm having some prototypes made right now. Just, I want to get 30 pigeon boxes so we can get seeds and phosphorus and nitrogen in there. So we're testing little things. You know, we'll have failures. To be completely frank, I just saw photos from Regina's garden, and, you know, their banana circle is thriving, but everything is completely dry and crusty. And it takes time, like, you know, those trees have to fill out. But she was able to get food, you know, for a period of weeks. We're going to have another rain, we'll do another planting. But until those trees start to grow and we start to build up that soil, it's going to take time, you know. But it is set into autopilot, which is the key thing.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Oh, follow-up question from Gabriel real quick. How do you prioritize your resilience? Oh, wait, she already, never mind, that was already asked.
That is the
Neil,
one.
what were we going to say? Yeah.
Oh, well, I was going to close this out and then go to the super secret post recording.
There we go.
While we still have people here.
Close it out.
Do we have any people watching?
Yeah, we had 60 people here.
Okay.
At the peak, we still got about 30 now.
Yeah.
But you're exactly the sort of person that Raleigh and I try to highlight. I don't think you're very well known in the community, but I think the work you're doing is tremendously important, and has tremendous potential as well to influence a lot of people. So we're pleased as punch you could come on and share your work with us. Really happy for the people who came and got to see it. For those of you who did just watch this, if you are interested in FMNR, we have a webinar that we did with Tony Renato last year, who was the guy who came up with it during his 20 years in Niger. If you're interested in Tony's webinar, that is on sustainabledesignmasterclass.com. We've got a lot of related stuff here that'll be bundled into a package pretty soon. But thanks for coming. Thanks for watching, and thanks to you, Natalie, especially.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Natalie.
Yeah. See you next time.